welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, to this Invest for Better Activator session, where we have the pleasure of hosting the authors of a groundbreaking new book. Do you call it the XX Edge or the double X Edge? XX Edge, Unlocking Higher Returns and Lower Risk. For those who have joined us before, or those who have not, welcome. This session is one of a series offered by Invest for Better to help its membership deepen their understanding of the values aligned and impact investing space, ask questions from experts that will help them in their own investing practice, and make valuable connections. Invest for Better is a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to empower women in the US and globally to understand the power of their investment assets, learn how to align their investments with their values, and activate them to make a more just and sustainable world. We offer our members a robust community of peers, the opportunity to join or lead circles where they can learn the fundamentals or go deep in an asset class or an approach. They can join educational events like this, and there are a robust set of discounts and benefits with partner organizations. So if you are not a member, please go to our website at investforbetter.org and join. Before I get started, I wanted to remind folks that some of this session is being taped and will be available for viewing by the membership afterwards. We may also excerpt part of it to be shared with a broader audience. So what we'll be doing is recording the initial presentation, and then we'll be turning off the recording for the more informal discussion period. So attendees can feel free to ask any questions confidentially. And while the session then is generally divided between the presentation and discussion period, we encourage people to send questions in the chat, and Patience and Ruth can decide whether it would be more timely to talk about them during the presentation or wait until afterwards. So let me introduce our wonderful authors and panelists. Patience Marime-Ball is founder and CEO of Women of the World Endowment, an investment nonprofit focused on centralizing women as economic, environmental, and social change makers while delivering market rate, risk-adjusted returns and impact at scale. She has more than 20 years of investment experience across capital markets, including at the International Finance Corporation, Emerging Sun LLC, and Golden Seeds. She serves on the investment and advisory committees of a number of well-known firms, enterprises, and nonprofits, including Apollo Global Management, Align, and As You Sow, to name a few. Ruth Shaber is founder and president of the Terra Health Foundation, which promotes health, well-being, and opportunity for women and girls. She is also co-founder and board chair of RIA Ventures, a group of foundations and investors that collaborate to bring new types of capital and enterprise to the field of reproductive health in the United States. And before moving into philanthropy and impact investing, she spent over 2 decades as a practicing obstetrician and gynecologist. So these are amazing women, and this is a book we've all been waiting for. There is a lot in there. For those of you who are Invest for Better members and on the Mighty Network, I hope you had a chance to review the excerpts that we included there. And maybe, Kara, you could include that excerpt again in the chat function. And if you haven't read the book yet, I know you'll be inspired after this conversation to read it. So, with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ruth and Patience, who I know are going to share a few slides, and then I'll ask a few questions and we'll continue the conversation. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Yes.
So I'm going to get started. And first of all, Ellen, I appreciate you saying this is the book that we've all been waiting for, and I think that is true. My background as a physician and executive at Kaiser Permanente is where I really honed my skills in evidence-based medicine and how to translate research into practice. And at Kaiser Permanente, I was in charge of implementing huge population care programs. And there is no more complex system than healthcare and the human body. And so when I started my career in philanthropy and impact investing in 2014, I was really determined to bring all I learned about the practice of evidence-based medicine to develop a field of evidence-based philanthropy and evidence-based impact investing. And on that journey, when I founded Terra Health Foundation, it was with the commitment to make it 100% mission aligned, which meant that across every asset class, we wanted to have a robust strategy for improving the lives of women and girls. And I found that there was quite a bit of gaps in the evidence base that there were not that many good metric standards. There weren't very many good evaluations of what were things and products that were good for women. There was certainly the strategy of looking at the number of women on boards and in the C-suite, but that was pretty much all that was being used. And I'm really proud that over my 10 years in this field that we have helped to develop the field of gender-focused investing. And that's what brought me to meet patients 3 years ago at a meeting, a tonic meeting in Italy, and really shared that commitment to evidence and gender-focused investing. And Patience, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Ellen, for this invitation to come and be in community with Invest for Better members. And thank you very much for those of you who are taking time away from, I think almost everybody at this time has pretty good weather. Even in the Northeast, we have good weather. And so, not being outside and being here with us, we really appreciate you. So my background is in investing. As Ellen said, I started my career at the IFC investing. We always said for triple bottom line. So it was not just investing for financial returns, but also making sure that our investments were good for people and planet. That's how I cut my teeth investing, and that's all I've ever known. So in many ways, this is what everybody now calls mission-aligned investing. I've been doing that all my life. And maybe I was born to do that because I was born in Zimbabwe, where the sensibility of any kind of investment, the opportunity of $1 having more than one thing to do at any given time is something that you sort of grow up with. And so I worked at the IFC first in infrastructure investment, so financing power generation assets around the world. And that was a lot of fun, sometimes being the only woman in the room, or at a power generation asset, or at a transmission station, or whatever it is. I then moved to do distressed assets work, which also didn't have rooms filled with women. And then finally, I moved to do investments in financial institutions around the world, but also as an LP in venture capital and private equity. And I was in that role and actually traveling in the Middle East when Lehman Brothers fell. And Christine Lagarde went on to say that even if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman sisters, things would have been different. And that got me thinking, what exactly would have been different? What if it had been Lehman Brothers and sisters? Would things have been different? And during that period, I started interrogating what was happening with companies that were publicly traded, where we had data disclosure. We noted that in that period, that's when we started really gathering data about gender diverse teams in leadership, in the C-suite and at board levels, and how that meant companies were navigating the crisis better. No company did well, but companies that had gender diverse teams were performing slightly better relative to their peers, whether it was their stock price, their profits, their profitability, or even how soon they emerged from the impacts of the crisis. And so, I got to understand that risk mitigation infrastructure was better when women were at the table and in rooms. And over time, that actually does lead to better performance. And I started interrogating how much of IFC's investment book was targeted at women. And beyond our microfinance book, which was at the time a $3 billion investment book, where we knew that every dollar that we invested, at least 50 cents of that went to women. But beyond that, we really didn't have a strategy. So I built Banking on Women for IFC, which is now a multi-billion-dollar platform for them. They have, with other financial institutions in the world, deployed more than $15 billion to women entrepreneurs around the world. We also issued the first ever gender bond, and also the first ever global debt fund, which was a $600 million debt fund with Goldman Sachs. I then took early retirement because I had my boys who were growing up without mostly their mother being around. I traveled a lot. And in that period, started investing in gender diverse teams for my own account as an angel investor with an entity called Golden Seeds. They invited me to join them to become part of their team on a fund. We tried, and we're trying to raise $100 million fund to invest in gender diverse teams. And institutional investors just didn't seem to understand, the value proposition that we're putting forth. Every time we said women, they wanted to know if we're talking about microfinance, as if women should only have access to microcredit, or whether we're talking about cook stoves, as if that's the only technology that women are able to manage. And that frustration is what led to the founding of Women of the World Endowment. And at Women of the World Endowment, we are trying to do three things. We're trying to build an institutional pool of capital, because my belief is that we can continue to engage with institutional capital from outside the room, or we can build a similar structure and then engage with them from inside the room. So our big ambition is over the next 10 years to build a $5 billion pool of assets that invest for three things. And this is our three-legged stool. The first is risk-adjusted returns comparable to any other market strategy, because we have to show them that having 100% mission that centralizes women as solution drivers actually drives, good performance, strong performance, financial performance. But every dollar is going to do these three things. So investments first. The second thing that every dollar will do is to deliver strategic capital. We're going to learn from our investments and share it with others. And we're already doing that. The last thing is that every dollar should also be used to build the field, very much in line with Terra Health Foundation. And when I met Ruth, and this is my last bit of in my introduction, is how I met Ruth. Ruth had a map that she was showing, that she showed me at breakfast, and she brought the systems map of how to change financial systems to prioritize women as solution drivers, and I just fell in love. This is essentially, I had started Women of the World Endowment with some money from my pension fund, with from my retirement capital, and my partnership with Ruth did not just bring additional systems thinking and evidence, belief in evidence, but it also brought some money. I founded Huawei in October of 2018, and in June, July of 2019, Terra Health Foundation gave us our first check that we could use beyond the money that I put in the bit of money from my friends and family that was helping us build Huawei. So, the story of Ruth and I is an incredible one. Ruth, if you give me 1 minute, I'm just going to talk about why we ended up writing this book, and then we can go into the slides. We were traveling together. We realized that there was so much to do. And by the way, I should say that Ruth is also the board chair of Women of the World Endowment. We're traveling together in Asia, and we're giving a presentation to a room that had, men and women in the investment world, asset allocators, whether private equity, investment banking, or venture capital. And as Ruth and I spoke, the women were going like this, and the guys were eating their breakfast. And Ruth and I looked at each other and we said, we have to do something about bridging this divide. So to your point, Ellen, this book is an important book for this time, because we have to get the men who manage 97.8% of capital today to understand that they're missing a big opportunity when women are not in the room. Over to you, Ruth.
So I'm just going to pull up the slides, and let me see if I can share my screen. And I will actually give it back to you, Patience, for our first slide.
Thank you, Ruth. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this book was to show, in an evidence-based way, what it was specifically that women would bring to the room if they were invited into the room. And it was heartening through our research, actually understand that there were specific traits that were more prevalent in women. So everything is relative. We're not saying that only women have these traits, and certainly not necessarily saying cis women have these traits, but for the most part, if you plot this on a curve, you will find that a lot of women, and in the bulging part of that curve, you'd find a lot of women holding these traits. And those traits include a collaborative work style. Women have low ego, and low ego tend to have low ego, and low ego leads to a more collaborative leadership style. They also are much more risk aware. Traditionally, people have said women are risk averse. What we found is that they're more risk aware, which means before making decisions, they do their research, they want to know what's around the corner, and then make those decisions. And finally, and really important in this time when we have so many things, challenges coming at us, is the fact that women have the long view. They do not sacrifice the long-term gains for short-term gains. So these are the three things that underpin the analysis that we take in the rest of the book. Back to you, Ruth.
And so in our assessment of why do women and women financial decision makers contribute to outperformance in the capital markets, it was both these gender differences that came up time and time again across all of the research that we evaluated, but also three other more contextual differences that, if you just think about the statistics, if you're only taking the top 5% of talent, whether it's in venture capital decision making or CEOs of Fortune 500 companies or the heads of healthcare insurance companies, if the percentage of talent is so small are female, then that means that you're leaving 45% of above average talent out of the room. And so just purely from a utilization of top talent argument, that would explain why adding women to decision making is going to promote better performance. Also, that we know that, and this is something that I learned really clearly in my background in healthcare, that if you recruit the people who are closest to the problems you're trying to solve to sit at the innovation table, you're going to get better solutions. You're going to get more sustainable, more efficient, more economical solutions. And that is also something that played out time and again in our analysis, that women, whether it's the pandemic or the care economy or education or climate change, poverty alleviation, violence, that women consistently are the ones most impacted by these problems. And so they're the ones who are more likely to bring innovation and creativity to the solutions. The other thing we want to make clear, and this came through pretty clearly, is that while some of the research is about women versus men, most of the research and the most compelling research was around gender diversity versus male only. And we want to make it clear that this is not a replacement strategy. This is that when you add women to the room, you get better performance. And that is also something that was pretty clear in our analysis. So when we got together to write this book, I think one of my biggest fears was that we would end up having to cherry pick. We knew that from our background and experience and anecdotes that we were pretty sure that women were contributing to outsized performance. But when we actually started looking at the evidence, we weren't sure what we were going to find. And it was so satisfying to see that across every asset class, whether it was CEOs or board positions or fund managers or venture capital, debt holders, real estate, farmers, that when women were included in the financial decision making, performance was better. And the other thing that we talk about quite a bit in this book is also the context, in that this is a time of tremendous change in our economies, in our environment, in governments, that there are these dislocations and disruptions that are going on that really require a new thinking. And it's crazy to think that a gender analysis should be new, because obviously women have been around making decisions about their families and their communities for millennia, but that bringing women into the seats of power and having them share significantly in financial decision making is really the only strategy that is going to really make a difference to the changes in our economy that are going on right now. Back to you, Patience.
And I'm just going to touch on what that significant difference would be. To Ruth's point, we're afraid that we would be cherry picking, but every single area that we poked at and had our research analysts who were supporting us look at, we saw we saw strong performance. And that strong performance comes from the traits that we talked about in the earlier on, as well as the contextual aspects that Ruth also elaborated on. So the data is out there that says that when you have gender inclusive teams, you're just likely to have, at a minimum, 21% or more outperformance in profitability, actually. And that just holds, in this study, it held across different sectors and different contexts. We also noted that, people say that there aren't enough resources, there isn't enough talent around certain things. Actually, there is. And when companies take the time to promote women into specific seats that they traditionally haven't put them in, they actually see an outperformance there too. So there's a study that we found particularly interesting, that female CFOs, and this is the management of money, female CFOs deliver a 6% increase in profits and an 8% increase in stock performance compared to male predecessors. So what this means is it either means that the women are just that much better and are not getting to the positions, and when they do, they show that they can really deliver strong returns. Or it shows that women are just much more capital efficient in how they manage, capital, much more efficient in how they manage capital. We also were able to realize that even companies that are new companies, so this holds across, enterprises at all stages, new companies that are female, where you have at least one female founder, you have there too, you see better performance. Companies with at least one female founder in the team saw a performance of 63%, better than most male teams over an observed long period of as long as 10 years. So it's not just, this is a blip, but really a sustained significant performance that's better, 63%. We looked at high finance. Hedge funds are meant to be these areas where men have an edge, but even in high finance, in the hedge funds space, women run hedge funds outperformed the average of larger hedge funds run by men by over 6 percentage points. That's a lot in the hedge funds space. And then finally, and this is one of Ruth's favorite data points, that and I think this data point actually links quite a bit to the point about women CFOs, that you just have better, more efficient capital management. So women run SMEs, and this is the fact that the world, not just in the US, but in most countries, SMEs are the backbone of employment in any of these economies. So SMEs are really important. And when you have women run small and medium-sized enterprises, banks don't actually give them access to capital the way they should, but they should. Because when you look at the portfolios inside banks that are segregated, and you look at the assets that they've loaned to women, they actually have low and non-performing loans in those portfolios. So banks actually do better when they lend to women. And then the final thing is that, to Ruth's point, this is not a remove and replace strategy. We're saying that gender diverse teams outperform. And we have a number of studies that show that. So McKinsey did a study in 2014 that they published in 2015 that showed that if countries, and in this study were 95 countries, if these 95 countries worked to get to gender parity by, over a period of time, by 2025, global GDP would have increased by $25 trillion. And even if you took a conservative number and you said of the 95 countries, they didn't even need to get to parity. All they needed to do was each country just had to get to a place where it was as good as the next country above it in the study. You would get a bump of $12 trillion to global GDP. So this is real. It does lead the idea of more women in the room as actors, as decision makers, as solution drivers does lead to a bigger pie. So it's not a remove and replace strategy, but let's build a bigger pie and create more room for more people to be around the table.
So what does it actually mean? And I think these are things that you probably, as part of this community and the Invest for Better community, you already think about. But we talk in the book about really 3 pillars of what does it mean to do a gender analysis as an investor? What are you looking for as a running an enterprise of any kind? What are you thinking about if you're going to really take full advantage of this the benefits of gender diversity? And that's why we named the book the XX Edge, because we're talking about the edge, the jump that you can get on competition by including gender, including women in financial decision making. And so three sort of categories of things to think about. If you're an investor, and I assume that's why you're part of this community, you're going to look at the gender composition of the companies that you're investing in. Who's on the board? Who's in the C-suite? Who's making decisions about how that enterprise is allocating their capital? Which teams, if you're an angel investor, are there women on the founding teams? Are there women entrepreneurs that are being overlooked? It doesn't mean that there has to be all women, but it should be that there's at least 30% women in any of these places. There's also an opportunity to screen innovations for gender input. A classic story that we included in the book is around the development of automobile safety. They relied on crash test dummies that were actually designed to be the size and shape of the average man. And that meant that how women responded in a car accident in terms of their bodies, where their center of gravity was, how their joints respond to impact was overlooked, and women died, and it cost car companies a ton of money because they had to go back and redo their airbags and their head restraints to accommodate the women's bodies. So if you're investing in a new company, ask them, how are you considering how women will use this product, in both in a safety consideration, obviously, but just as a consumer? And are you missing out on a market opportunity by not considering women? And are women at the table making those design decisions so that your products are actually going to be desirable and highly used by women? And then third is to think about the geography. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at government, but it was clear that when women are in, there's 2 aspects of government leadership. One is just, are women in leadership in companies that in enterprises that you're investing in a particular geography, but also what are the laws and opportunities for women in that place? So, obvious considerations are countries where women can't drive, or women can't own property, or can't have access to capital. But these are going to create significant limitations to your investments in those places. But frankly, you got to start looking at the United States too. Now we have half the states in our country that don't allow women access to reproductive health. And that means that the workforce is going to be destabilized. Women aren't going to be able to get the healthcare they need. And these are really important considerations. Are you going to invest in a company whose headquarters are in Texas or not? And so thinking about the stability of government and the stability of the workforce in the places where you're investing. Back to you, Patience.
Absolutely. So this is a slide that Kathleen just prompted in the question that she just asked, that in instances where you don't have response, positive response to the outperformance data that we just detailed earlier, do we find that sometimes the conversation around the material risk of waiting might be what people will respond to? I think you're onto something, Kathleen. In this book, we talk about the increasing dislocations and disruptions coming at us, and we all are living them. What used to be externalities for companies is no longer an externality, and whether it's climate, racial justice, you name it, it's no longer an externality, and it's not even an externality that's coming tomorrow. It's here and now. all companies are realizing that the things that they've ignored, they can no longer ignore. So these are, and to Ruth's point, when women are not involved in certain decision making, opportunities there's an opportunity cost to that. There's the real financial costs, but there's also the opportunity of not having inclusive products that actually will get you bigger market share. But there's also the risk of the missed opportunity of managing downside risk. And so we talked in this book about unstable governments. And the World Bank and the World Economic Forum just released a study that showed that if the world continues in the same way that we're going right now, 50% of the world's population in 10 years will be living in conflict zones. And that number goes up to 85% or something like that within a few years thereafter. And when we think about conflict, we think about, the war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, or what's going on in Middle East, or some other, or Myanmar, or but we really should be thinking about instability, the kind that we're seeing in Sri Lanka, because there's too much debt. The countries are holding too much debt, or the kind that we're seeing in this country with too many guns on the streets. That is, a different forms of conflict. And the data that says 50% of the world's population is going to live in those contexts should be a wake-up call for all of us. And when it comes to conflict specifically, our book surfaces the fact that when women are involved in conflict resolution conversations, the peace is likely to actually last. Is 35% more likely to last 15 years or longer. And peace is going to hold because women tend to negotiate for the safety of their families. Whereas in this study, it shows that men tend to negotiate for territory. And so these are some of the reasons why having women in rooms, especially in unstable, environments, government environments, is really important. Ruth talks about the ability of to have better innovations, product innovations. Sorry, Ruth, the slide toggled to your last slide by mistake. The missed opportunity in innovation, the missed opportunity in bringing in a workforce that really can deliver better opportunities for most, more inclusive opportunities for most, but also just outperformance in profitability and outperformance in risk mitigation. And also the fact that you're not taking into account the advantage of a diverse leadership force. And in this particular case, the material risk is even more pronounced. And I think the last 2 years of living through the COVID pandemic have shown us that. So we know that 70% of the world's population, 70% of the world's healthcare workers, more than 70% actually, is female, right? We applauded them as they held the line between us and more deaths during COVID. But when you look at the leadership in the healthcare space, less than 25% is female. Yet they're the ones on the front lines, understanding what it is that's needed. But when you take it even more further upstream, and you look at the fact that lack of capital to female scientific researchers, female PIs, we talk about 3% to venture capital, only 3% of capital going to women-led entities in venture capital. Well, it's about the same. About 3% of grant capital that funds innovation in science, goes to female PIs. But we are all now able to get around and have our communities again and see each other in person because of the COVID vaccines. And women were critical and instrumental in the science behind the COVID vaccines. from the CRISPR research that Charpentier and Doudna did, to the mRNA research with Dr. Carrico Corbet and Carrico and then Dr. Corbet at the NIH. These were female who took women who took the road less traveled. Men were studying DNA, women wanted to study mRNA, and look at what it has given us. So the risk of not funding women, not recognizing them as actors is real, right? And so to your question, Kathleen, it does lead to direct costs for companies, for us as human beings in terms of our health and wealth, and for economies as a whole.
I'm moving us to the next slide, patients, because I want to make sure we have time for questions. And I'll power through this quickly, but I think that this is one thing that's really interesting that came out of our writing of the book, and I think that you all could have some strong opinions about. In my generation, women were successful in business or in government because the women, well, I'd say my generation and older, would be the women who could act more like men, right? You showed up at work, you showed your aggressive side, you showed your masculine side, and you didn't talk about what was going on at home with childcare or how you wanted to be more collaborative. Those were things that you suppressed. And I mean, when I was in my training in medical school, you never talked about what was going on at home, that your kid was sick and you had to go pick them up from school. You just didn't talk about it. But now I think that what this book and what we're learning from our research and conversations is that, in fact, the reason why women are successful in this financial decision-making paradigm is because of their gender differences, not in spite of their gender differences. That in fact, our qualities that we tend to have more collaborative, more risk-aware, more long view are actually really important in that we need to be confident that when we bring those things to the table, we're going to be contributing outsized value. And then also our lived experiences, whether it's because we're raising children or because we're taking care of our parents, or we appreciate the world and poverty or war or conflict differently than our male colleagues do, that those are actually really important experiences that we need to bring to the table and not hide and not suppress. And so it's just an interesting paradigm shift for me. And I'm really curious to know how you all interpret that. And ultimately, we wrote this book for men, but we wrote it to demonstrate the power of women. And we were not apologetic. We were not blaming or shaming. We were just stating the way the research shows that women show up at work. Do you want to add anything to that, Patience?
No, we can move to the next slide, Ruth. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So the last part of our book, we had quite a bit of fun in the slide in the section right before this call to action, where Ruth and I sort of imagined the world that could be. We asked ourselves, what if, you know, in the healthcare sector, we actually had more women, 70% leadership being female, or just balanced leadership being female? What would you know, our health globally look like? And the same thing in investments, in asset allocation. Would the destination of capital be different if women were in decision-making rooms, in asset allocation seats? And then in the last part, we tried to zero in a little bit on, you know, the call to action. What can people do? And we, you know, highlighted a number of things. If you are an asset owner, think about who is moving your capital. Because if 97.8% of capital continues to be moved by white men specifically, it would be foolish of us to think of, that we're going to have different outcomes in terms of where that capital goes. People allocate according to their lived journeys. So it's not blaming. It is they're allocating according to how they see the world. We need to change those rooms. Think about who is managing your capital. And every single one of us is actually an investor, whether you actually have a ton of, you know, assets that you own, or you're just an investor through your what you purchase, which stores you frequent, or, you know, your 401k. Think of how it's invested. So, and then companies will say, would love more women in those asset allocation seats, but they just are not there. The thing is, when you look at companies at the entry level, you have better gender balance than you have as you move towards the C-suite, and companies can do better. They can mentor more women, they can promote more women, and they certainly can hire differently so that they can bring in more female talent. I'm going to stop there. Ruth.
And it takes intention to do all those things. You have to, it doesn't, the talented women don't just walk across your threshold. You have to go out and look for them. Also, as we talked about designing for women, the crash test dummies example, but there are many, many, many examples throughout industries where there are opportunities to design better products for women. Voting for women, this means obviously at the state and national level, but also at the community level. School boards manage budgets. That's all they do, really. And so thinking about your local elections, voting your proxies, I have a bad habit of throwing those proxy cards away, but we really need to look at them. And then, especially for our male colleagues, listening to women. We know that there need to be more than just one woman in a room for her voice to be well heard. And we need to train our male colleagues to really make space, not just physical space, but also to listen to women and to tell their friends that our male colleagues can demonstrate their commitment to this by their actions, but also in how they talk about it. And we really, really want you to buy books. All the proceeds from the sale of the book go to our nonprofits, to Tara Health and Women of the World Endowment. But we do think that the sale of books actually helps drive the movement that we're trying to spark. That the book we see as a tool, hopefully for all of you in your investing and in your own opportunities to influence, but that we need to flip the paradigm. We need to change the face of finance to being gender diverse. So please buy books for men in your life, not just the women in your life. Buy one for your financial analyst. Buy them for your husbands and partners and sons and fathers. So that's all we had to our slides, but we do want to make sure that we have time for questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruth and Patience. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read the book. I mean, it's just got it all there. There's so much research in there. It is holistic in terms of who's making decisions, how the decisions are being made, and what the decisions are for, and then what that ultimate, their urgency around our changing economy right now and how this is just critical right now. We don't have that much time left, so I had a few questions I want to ask, but I might just jump right to, because this is an action-oriented group at Invest for Better. It's really people ready to do something with their own portfolios or influencing others. So maybe before we turn it over to others and their questions, maybe talk about in the various conversations you've been having around the country on this. What have you been? Well, I think we all buy this message. We don't even need all the data, but it's great to have it. But how have you been this business of getting this message to the power brokers of today? Kind of what are the right messages? What are the right messengers? I mean, Kathleen started on this. Kind of what can we all do? Do you have anything more that you've learned in terms of feedback from others as well?
Well, we're starting to actually put together a messaging memo, and we've hired some really talented people to help us with that influence strategy. And we do plan to have some one-on-one conversations with the men in our networks in finance and have them introduce us to people who aren't in our networks, because we really have to get out of our box to understand what are the right messages that resonate and help drive change. So I don't think we can answer that yet. We can tell you what we think is going to matter. We're really pivoting to working within industries. We want to have access to the largest asset allocators, the folks who make the products that we all look to invest in. We want to understand the paradigm of who actually can get us to a tipping point. When we started writing this book, I had I had this fantasy that, Larry Fink from BlackRock a couple years ago, he made the proclamation that he was going to be screening all of BlackRock products for sustainability. And he said, it's not because I'm an environmentalist, it's because I'm a capitalist. And I had this dream that someday he's going to say, I'm not a feminist, I'm a capitalist. And so that ultimately is kind of our North Star, that when we can get Larry Fink to recognize that this is not a niche, this is not ESG, this is actually the most appropriate, most efficient financial analytical tool out there is gender diversity. So that's what we're thinking.
And if we just punctuate that, Ruth, with the recent Vanguard report that looked at 2,800 financial managers or something of the sort, they did a survey and they looked at the performance of their portfolios, and the ones that were gender diverse were delivering consistently about north of 50 basis points above relative to peers. And there isn't another investment strategy that gives you that kind of return year on year, that kind of, extra return year on year. And so it's just so simple, but the tough part is how we're going to get people to buy this and mainstream it, not make it a niche strategy. So any recommendations and suggestions we would love.